with nowhere to go. The widow went to live in an old train and had an unexpected surprise. Jennifer Miller walked along the rusty tracks holding baby little Johnny against her chest, while her other 3 children followed silently. After losing her husband in a work accident and no longer being able to pay the rent for the small house they lived in, she found herself with no options and accepted a stranger's odd suggestion to take shelter in an abandoned train car. It was when they spotted the locomotive stopped on the tracks that her heart tightened. Emma Grace, 8 years old, tugged her skirt with her small hand and whispered, "Mum, are we really going to live in a train?" asked Michael, her 10-year-old son, as they walked along the dirt road toward the rusty tracks that cut through the rural landscape. "For now, son, until Mummy can get a better job," replied Amanda, adjusting baby Ethan in her arms and trying to sound more confident than she felt. The other 3 children followed in silence. Lily Rose, 8 years old, carried the bag with the few clothes they owned. The twins, Peter and Paul, just 6 years old, took turns carrying the single pot they had managed to save from home. The sun was already setting when they finally spotted the rusty locomotive stopped on the tracks. The metal structure was covered in rust and low-lying plants, yet still imposing against the orange evening sky. The cars stretched for several yards, some with broken windows, others completely sealed. "Wow, it's bigger than I imagined," murmured Amanda, cautiously approaching the structure. The man from the market had given her a rusty key, saying the 3rd passenger car was in better condition. When she managed to force the door open and enter the dusty compartment, she was surprised to find that there was still electricity working. A dim light flickered a few times before fully illuminating, revealing old but still solid wooden benches. "How can there be light here?" questioned Michael, exploring the car with curiosity. "I don't know, son. Maybe it's still connected somewhere," replied Amanda, equally intrigued. In the first few days, the adjustment was difficult. The children cried at night, afraid of the strange noises coming from the other cars. Amanda barely slept, always alert for any sign of danger. During the day, she walked to the city to look for work, leaving Michael in charge of his younger siblings. It was in the 2nd week that the first serious problem arose. Amanda was organizing the few things they had when she heard heavy footsteps approaching the train. A tall, rough man with an unkempt beard and dirty clothes banged violently on the car door. "Hey, you inside! Get out of there immediately!" shouted the man, his voice echoing between the cars. Amanda carefully opened the door, keeping the baby securely in her arms. "Good morning, sir. Is there a problem?" "Problem? You're trespassing on private property. This train is mine and you have no right to be here." The man identified himself as Richard Coleman and claimed to be in charge of the area. His aggressive attitude terrified the children, especially the twins, who hid behind their mother. "Sir, I was told this place was abandoned. We have nowhere to go. We're just a family trying to survive," explained Amanda, trying to stay calm. "I don't care about your situation. You have until tomorrow to get out of here or I'll remove you by force myself." Richard stomped away furiously, leaving a cloud of dust and a terrified family. That night, Amanda didn't sleep a wink, thinking about what she would do if she really had to leave. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next day, while exploring the train further to try to understand who really owned that place, Amanda made an intriguing discovery. In the closet of the carriage where they slept, she found an old trunk full of women's clothing from the time when the train was still in operation. The pieces were surprisingly well preserved, and the strangest thing was that they seemed to have been made exactly for her size. "Mom, is this dress yours?" asked Lily Rose, watching Amanda try on a navy blue dress with white lace details. "No, honey. They must have belonged to the wife of some train employee," replied Amanda, admiring herself in the small cracked mirror she had found on the wall. The clothing fit her body perfectly, as if it had been sewn especially for her. It was a strange and yet comforting feeling, as if those clothes had been waiting for her for a long time. In the following days, the children began to adapt better to life on the train. During their games exploring the other carriages, they befriended a boy from the neighboring farm named John Charles, who was 9 years old. He knew the history of that region well and loved to tell about the past of the passenger train that had stopped running many years ago. My grandmother always says this train was very important, explained John Charles to the children as they played among the tracks. It carried people from one city to another, and there were even special carriages for the employees' families to live in. Families lived right here? Asked Michael, fascinated. Yes. My grandmother said there was an engineer who lived in this very carriage where you are now. She remembers him because he was very handsome and had a beautiful family. This information further piqued Amanda's curiosity. If families really lived there, perhaps her presence wasn't as strange as Richard Coleman wanted to make it seem. One afternoon, while organizing things in the carriage, Amanda discovered a secret drawer behind a loose wooden panel. Inside, she found several old black and white photographs showing happy people posing next to the same locomotive, but in its heyday, when it still shone and worked perfectly. One photograph in particular caught her attention in a disturbing way. It showed a man wearing an engineer's uniform, smiling next to a woman and 4 small children. The man had facial features incredibly similar to those of her late husband Charles, who had passed away 2 years ago in a work accident at a construction site. "This can't be possible," murmured Amanda, bringing the photograph closer to the light to observe it better. The resemblance was striking, not just the facial features, but also the way the man smiled, the way he held the woman by the waist, even the small scar on his left eyebrow that Charles had had since childhood. That night, Amanda couldn't sleep thinking about that photograph. How was it possible that a man so similar to her husband had worked exactly in the same place where she now found herself? Was it just a strange coincidence, or was there something more behind that situation? The answer began to reveal itself a few days later when Richard Coleman returned with his usual aggressive attitude. "I warned you that you had to leave here," he shouted, banging on the carriage door again. This time Amanda was prepared. She had the photograph in her hand when she opened the door. "Mr. Coleman, before we continue arguing, I'd like you to look at this," she said, extending the old photograph. The man took the image suspiciously, but his expression changed completely when he saw what was there. His face paled and his hands began to tremble slightly. Where did you find this?" "Right here, in this carriage. Do you know this man in the photograph?" Richard remained silent for a few seconds, clearly disturbed by the image. "This man, his name was Charles Mitchell. He worked on this train many years ago," he finally admitted, his voice now much lower and controlled. "Charles Mitchell was my husband," said Amanda, watching the man's reaction closely. The impact of this revelation was immediate. Richard nearly dropped the photograph, his face now completely pale. You are Amanda? Charles's wife?" "Yes, it's me. But how do you know my name?" I worked with your husband. We were partners in a construction company. But there were complications." Richard's voice was now shaky, as if he were reliving painful memories. "What kind of complications?" insisted Amanda. "Financial problems. Your husband. He owed me a lot of money when he left. I lost almost everything because of him." This revelation brought a flood of conflicting emotions to Amanda. Her husband had never mentioned any partner or debts. In fact, Charles had always been very private about his business, saying only that he worked in construction around the area. "I didn't know about any debt," said Amanda, genuinely confused. "Of course you didn't. Charles never shared the bad things with his family. He always wanted to protect you from his problems." Richard seemed to be struggling with his own emotions. There was anger in his eyes, but also something that seemed like sadness or even remorse. "Look, Amanda," he continued, sighing heavily, "I didn't know you and the children were going through hardships. If I had known, what would you have done? Maybe things could have been different." This conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an elegant elderly woman walking carefully along the tracks. She wore a simple but good quality dress and carried an old leather bag. Her grey hair was tied in a neat bun, and her blue eyes showed an intelligence and determination that was striking. "Richard, what are you doing here again?" asked the woman, her voice firm despite her advanced age. "Mrs. Helen, I can explain—" "Explain what exactly? Why are you bothering this family?" The arrival of this woman clearly changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Richard, who moments before had seemed authoritative and aggressive, now looked like a boy being scolded by his teacher. "Mrs. Helen, this is Amanda, Charles Mitchell's wife," he said, pointing to the photograph still in his hands. The woman's eyes lit up with a mix of surprise and deep emotion. "Amanda, finally! I've been looking for you for so long." Amanda's confusion only grew. How could this unknown woman have been looking for her? "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't understand. Who are you?" "My name is Helen Morris. I am the owner of this train and all the land around it. But more importantly," she approached Amanda with teary eyes, "I knew your husband Charles very well. In fact, I have a lot to tell you about him." This new revelation left Amanda even more confused. If Helen was the true owner of the place, then why did Richard act as if he were the owner? And what did she have to tell about Charles? "Richard," said Helen with authority, "you may leave. I need to speak with Amanda alone." "But Mrs. Helen, you don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly, and you know very well that you have no authority over this place. Now leave before I lose my patience." Richard hesitated for a moment, looking back and forth between Helen and Amanda, but finally stepped away, mumbling under his breath. "Come in, dear," Helen said to Amanda, pointing toward the train car. "We have much to discuss." The children watched everything with curiosity, especially Michael, who could sense that something very important was happening. Inside the car, Helen looked around with evident nostalgia. "It's been so long since I was last here," she murmured, running her hand over the wooden benches. "Are you really the owner of this train?" "Yes, dear. I inherited everything from my late husband, who owned the Green Valley Railway Company. This train line operated for over 50 years, transporting people and goods between towns in the region." Helen sat on one of the benches and invited Amanda to do the same. "But tell me, how did you get here? Who told you about this place?" Amanda recounted the man at the market who had offered her shelter on the train, and how her desperate financial situation had forced her to accept the offer. "Interesting," Helen said thoughtfully. "This man, did he look like someone you know?" "Actually, ma'am, he was a complete stranger." "Why do you ask?" Helen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took the photograph that was still in Amanda's hands. "Is this man in the photo really your husband?" "Yes, I mean it's not exactly him, but the resemblance is striking. Mr. Richard said he knew my husband and that they worked together." "Richard told many lies today," Helen replied with a sad smile. "Your husband Charles did work here, but not as a regular employee. He was one of the rightful heirs to this company." This revelation hit Amanda like a bolt of lightning. Her husband, heir to a railway company. It made no sense with the simple, hard-working man she had known. "That's impossible, ma'am. Charles was a bricklayer, working on small construction jobs around the area. He never mentioned anything about trains or inheritance." "Charles was my nephew, dear, son of my husband's brother. When my husband died 15 years ago, Charles inherited a significant portion of the company. But there were complications." Helen paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. "What kind of complications?" "Richard Coleman wasn't just Charles's partner in a construction business. He was the administrator of this property and had been embezzling money from the company for years. When Charles found out and tried to confront him, Richard threatened him. Not just him, but the whole family. The puzzle pieces were falling into place in a way Amanda could never have imagined. "Charles never told me any of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't tell you because he was trying to protect you and the children. Charles came to me 3 years ago, desperate, saying Richard had discovered where you lived and was making threats. We decided it would be safer if he disappeared for a while until we could gather evidence against Richard. But he died in a work accident. The construction company showed me the papers." Helen gently held Amanda's hands. "Charles didn't die, dear. He's alive." Amanda's world seemed to stop. Helen's words echoed in her mind as if coming from very far away. Her husband? Alive? How was that possible? What are you saying?" "Charles is hiding in a town about 200 kilometers from here. He's working to gather evidence against Richard and his accomplices. The construction company that showed you the accident papers is part of the scheme." The emotions that overwhelmed Amanda were devastating. Anger at having been deceived for so long, relief at knowing Charles was alive, confusion about that whole complex situation, and a deep pain when thinking about all the suffering she and the children had endured. Why didn't anyone tell me the truth?" she asked, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Charles wanted to tell you, dear. He came to me constantly, desperate to come home. But every time we thought it was safe, Richard would discover something or make a new threat." Helen stood up and walked to the train car window, watching the landscape outside. "Charles sent me money monthly for me to give to you, but you had moved from the house where you lived and I couldn't find you. I searched the entire area for months. We moved 3 times last year. The money had run out and we couldn't pay rent anywhere. I know, dear, and I'm sorry I couldn't find you sooner. If I had known about the hardships you were going through—" Amanda wiped her tears with trembling hands. "How can I be sure you're telling the truth? There have been so many lies already." Helen understood Amanda's distrust perfectly. She took her purse and pulled out a crumpled letter. "Charles wrote me this letter 2 weeks ago. Read it yourself." With trembling hands, Amanda opened the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Charles's, with its unique characteristics she knew so well. "Aunt Helen, I can't stand being away from Amanda and the children any longer. I know it's risky, but I need to come home. I found where Richard hides the documents that prove his crimes, and I'm sure this time we can end this nightmare. Please keep looking for my family. I'm sure they need me now more than ever. With love, Charles." The letter was dated just 2 weeks ago. Charles really was alive and thinking of them. When can I see him?" "Very soon, I hope. Charles said he was planning to return in a few days. He finally got access to the documents he needs to prove Richard's crimes." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, Amanda could barely sleep. Her mind was in turmoil with all the day's revelations. Charles was alive. All the pain and suffering of the last 2 years had been based on a lie. On one hand, she felt immense joy knowing the love of her life was okay. On the other hand, the anger and feeling of betrayal were almost unbearable. How could he let her believe he was dead? How could he allow her and the children to go through so much hardship? Even if it was to protect them, the pain had been devastating. The next morning, Helen returned to the train with a surprising proposal. "Amanda, while we wait for Charles to return, I'd like you and the children to stay here on the train. It is, after all, part of the family inheritance." "Are you sure you don't mind?" "Of course I don't mind. In fact, I'm happy to know this place is being inhabited by a family again. For 15 years it stood empty and abandoned." "What about Richard? Won't he try to get us out of here?" Helen smiled in a way that made it clear she wasn't the least bit worried about Richard. "Leave Richard to me. He knows very well he has no legal authority over this property. The only reason he comes here is to try to scare potential witnesses." "Witnesses to what?" "To his crimes, dear. Richard didn't just steal money from the railway company. He was also involved in document forgery, bribing public officials, and several other illegal activities. Charles spent the last 2 years gathering evidence of all this. During the days that followed, Helen became a constant presence in Amanda and the children's lives. She brought food, clothes and toys and loved telling stories about the railway's golden years. The children, especially Lily Rose and the twins, were delighted by the kind lady who felt like a loving grandmother. "Aunt Helen," Michael said one day, using the address she'd asked the children to use, "what was it like when the train actually worked?" "Oh, my dear, it was wonderful. This train traveled between 5 different cities, carrying passengers, mail and goods. There were special cars for meals, sleeping cars for long journeys, and even this car where you are now, which was reserved for employees' families." "And were there lots of people working here?" "So many people. There were engineers, firemen, conductors, cleaning staff, kitchen staff, maintenance crews. It was like a small town on rails." Lily Rose, always curious, asked, "Aunt Helen, why did the train stop running?" Helen grew somewhat sad answering this question. "Well, dear, several things happened. The roads improved and many people started using cars and buses instead of the train. Also, there were problems with dishonest people who stole a lot of money from the company. Amanda understood Helen was referring to Richard and his crimes, but in a way the children could grasp without being frightened. It was during the second week after Helen's revelation that everything began to accelerate dramatically. Amanda was hanging clothes on the makeshift lines she'd created between the cars when she saw a familiar figure walking along the tracks in the distance. Her heart began racing when she recognized the silhouette she had loved for so many years. It was Charles. He was thinner than she remembered. His hair now had some grey strands that weren't there before, and his posture showed the weight of the difficult recent years. But it was undeniably him. "Charles!" she shouted, dropping the clothes and running toward her husband. The reunion was emotionally overwhelming. Charles hugged her tightly, as if wanting to make sure she was real. Both cried, unable to speak. "Amanda, my love, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything," he whispered in her ear. The children who had heard their mother's shout came running out of the car. Their reaction was a complex mix of joy, confusion, and even a little fear. Baby Ethan didn't even remember his father, and the twins were clearly confused about who this man was that was making their mother cry. Only Michael and Lily Rose immediately recognized their father, and they too joined the family embrace. "Daddy, Mommy said you had—" began Lily Rose. "I know, sweetheart, I know. Daddy had to leave to protect you, but now I'm back." Charles knelt to be at the children's level, especially the twins and baby Ethan, who were looking at him warily. "I know you don't remember me very well," he said with a choked voice, "but I am your daddy and I never stopped loving you, not for a second." The process of family reconnection wasn't simple or immediate. There were 2 years of pain, confusion, and abandonment to process. Michael, who had become the man of the house during his father's absence, struggled to accept his authority again. "Where were you when we had no food?" he asked with contained anger. "Where were you when we got evicted from our home 3 times? Charles understood his son's anger perfectly. "You have every right to be mad at me, Michael. I made decisions I thought were right, but they ended up causing you so much suffering. I'll never be able to fully make up for these lost years, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying." Amanda, in turn, wavered between the joy of having her husband back and the anger at having been deceived for so long. "How could you let me believe you were dead?" she asked that first night, when they were finally alone to talk. "Because it was the only way to keep you safe," answered Charles, his hands trembling slightly. "Amanda, you have no idea what Richard and his accomplices are capable of doing. They've threatened to kidnap the children, burn our house, even physically hurt you. But 2 years, Charles, 2 years of suffering that could have been avoided." "I know, my love. Believe me, not a single day went by that I didn't regret this decision, but every time I thought about coming back, Richard found some way to threaten me again." Charles then told the whole story from the beginning. How he had discovered he was the heir to the railway company just a few years after their marriage, when Helen's uncle died. How Richard, who was the estate administrator, had created a complex scheme to steal company profits and sell land illegally. When I discovered what he was doing and tried to confront him, he showed me photographs of you and the children. He said he knew where you lived, where the children went to school, which route you took to go to the market. The threats were very specific and frightening. Why didn't you go to the police? I did, Amanda. But Richard had contacts in the local police. One of the police chiefs had been taking bribes from him for years. When I went to file the report, that same day, Richard called me telling me exactly what I had said and to whom. The story Charles told was of a complexity and wickedness that Amanda could never have imagined. Richard not only stole money from the railway company, but had created a corruption network that included public officials, police officers, and even local judges. So you decided to fake your own death? Helen and I planned everything. The construction company where I supposedly died belongs to a friend of hers from another town who agreed to help by creating the false documents. The idea was for you to be safe while I gathered enough evidence to destroy Richard's entire corruption network. And where have you been during these 2 years? In a town called Blue Rock, 200 kilometers from here. working as a bricklayer under a false name, but investigating Richard's crimes. I gained access to bank documents, recorded conversations, evidence of bribes, everything needed to put him in prison for a long time. Helen had arrived during the conversation and heard the last parts of Charles's explanation. He brought a suitcase full of evidence, she said. Documents, photographs, audio recordings. We finally have enough material to finish off Richard once and for all. Amanda felt somewhat comforted to know that at least there was a valid reason for so much suffering, but she was still struggling with her conflicting emotions. And now, what happens from now on? Now we're going to turn over all the evidence to the federal authorities, explained Charles. Helen has contacts in Washington, D.C. who aren't involved in the local corruption. Richard and all his accomplices will finally pay for the crimes they committed. And us, our family? Charles tenderly held Amanda's hands. We're going to rebuild our life together. The inheritance from the railway company is significant enough to ensure you'll never face financial hardships again. And more important than that, he looked directly into her eyes, I'll never leave you again. In the days that followed, the family dynamic slowly began to normalize. Charles showed endless patience with the children, especially with Michael, who remained resistant to his presence. One afternoon, while playing near the tracks, Michael finally exploded with all the anger he had held on to for 2 years. You can't just show up and expect everything to go back to how it was, he shouted at his father. I took care of Mom and my siblings when you weren't here. I was the one who comforted Peter when he cried from nightmares. I was the one who helped Lily Rose with her homework. Charles listened to everything in silence, allowing his son to express all his pain. You're right, Michael, he said finally. You took care of the family when I should have been here. You've become a very brave and responsible man, and I'm very proud of you. Then why did you leave? Charles sat on the ground beside his son. Because I thought I was protecting you. But now I understand that protection doesn't just mean keeping you physically safe. It means being present. It means facing problems together, as a family. And if another problem comes up, will you leave again? Never again, son. I promise. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. This conversation marked the beginning of healing for the family. Michael would still take time to fully forgive his father, but it was the first step on a journey that would eventually lead them back to family unity. Meanwhile, Richard had discovered that Charles was back and that his presence posed a real threat to his criminal schemes. Instead of trying to run or hide, he decided to take a more aggressive approach. On the eve of the date set to hand over the evidence to the federal authorities, Richard showed up at the train, accompanied by 2 men Amanda had never seen before. They arrived in the early hours when the whole family was sleeping. Charles woke first to the sound of heavy footsteps around the train. Amanda, wake up, he whispered, gently shaking his wife. There are people out here. Charles Mitchell! I know you're in there, shouted Richard from outside the train car. Come out and talk like a man or we'll force our way in. The children woke up frightened by the shouting. Lily Rose started crying, and the twins hid behind their mother. Stay here with the children, Charles told Amanda. I'm going out to talk to him. No, Charles, what if he tries to do something to you? He won't do anything to me in front of the children. Men like Richard are cowards when they're exposed. Charles stepped out of the train car calmly, keeping his hands visible to show he posed no physical threat. Richard. Long time. Not long enough, Richard replied sarcastically. You've caused a lot of trouble pretending to be dead. Trouble for whom? For you and your criminal schemes? Watch your words, Charles. There's still a lot at stake here. One of the men with Richard moved closer to Charles in a threatening manner, but Richard stopped him with a gesture. What do you want, Richard? I want you to forget all these foolish ideas about evidence and reports. I want you to take your family and disappear from this region forever. And in return? In return, you all stay alive and safe. The threat was delivered directly and coldly. Charles felt a chill down his spine, but kept his composure. Are you threatening my family in front of me? I'm offering a choice. Accept my proposal, or the consequences will be severe for all of you. It was at this moment that Helen appeared walking along the tracks, accompanied by 3 men in suits whom Charles didn't recognize. Richard Coleman, she shouted from a distance. "You are trespassing on private property and threatening an innocent family." The arrival of Helen and the unknown men clearly wasn't part of Richard's plans. He looked nervously at his accomplices, as if deciding whether to flee or continue with the confrontation. "Who are these men, Aunt Helen?" asked Charles. "Federal police agents," she replied with a satisfied smile. "They came to investigate the reports of corruption and fraud in the region." Richard's face instantly paled. He knew his situation had become untenable. "You can't prove anything against me," he shouted, his voice now showing desperation instead of authority. "Mr. Coleman," said one of the federal agents calmly approaching, "we have a search and seizure warrant for your property, and we'd like you to come with us to provide some explanations." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Richard tried to run, but the other two agents were strategically positioned and easily intercepted him. His accomplices, seeing that the situation had become impossible, surrendered without resistance. "It's over, Richard," said Charles, watching the man being handcuffed. "Your crimes have finally been uncovered. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the days following Richard's arrest, the Mitchell family's life began to take on a completely new shape. The evidence that Charles had collected over 2 years proved devastating to the local corruption network. Besides Richard, 12 more people were arrested, including 2 police officers, a judge, and 3 municipal public servants. Helen, as the true owner of the former railway company, offered a proposal that would change the family's life forever. "Charles," she said one sunny morning as they had coffee in the carriage that had become the family's temporary home, "I'd like to propose a partnership." "What kind of partnership, Aunt?" "This property has over 1,000 acres of fertile land. With the money recovered from Richard's crimes, we can restore not only the train, but also develop a sustainable agricultural project." Helen's proposal was ambitious but realistic. With the available financial resources, they could transform the old railway line into an enterprise combining organic farming, rural tourism, and historical preservation. "The children could grow up in a healthy environment close to nature," Helen continued. "And you'd have financial stability for life." Amanda and Charles exchanged glances, communicating in that silent way only couples with a long history together can manage. "We need to think about this," said Amanda. "It's a very big decision." "Of course, dear. Take your time, but remember that this place is already part of your family's history." During the following weeks, the family explored the possibilities of the project proposed by Helen. Michael, who was beginning to reconnect with his father, showed great interest in the idea of creating an environmental education center for local youth. "Dad, we could teach other kids about sustainable farming," he said, his excitement being the first genuine display of joy Charles had seen in his son since his return. Lily Rose was fascinated with the idea of restoring the historic train. "Mom, just imagine how beautiful it would be if we fixed up all the carriages and gave tours for people to learn about the railroad's history." The twins, Peter and Paul, still too young to fully understand the project, were simply happy to finally have a stable home, and the family reunited. The baby Ethan, who had been born during the family's most difficult times, was growing up healthy and surrounded by love, in an environment that promised to give him all the opportunities his birth circumstances seemed to have denied him. 2 months after Richard's arrest, the family made the decision to accept Helen's proposal. The signing ceremony for the partnership documents was held in the very train car where it had all begun, with Helen, Charles, Amanda, and even Michael, as a symbolic representative of the next generation, putting their signatures on the papers that formalized the new company. The first project implemented was the complete restoration of the train. Charles, who had learned a lot about construction during his years working in the sector, personally supervised every detail of the renovation. The cars were cleaned, painted, and equipped with all modern amenities, while maintaining the charm and authenticity of the era when the train operated. The car where the family had lived during the first few months was transformed into a small but comfortable family home. Each child got their own space, and Charles and Amanda finally had a private room where they could rebuild their intimacy as a couple. Amanda discovered she had a talent for administration and became responsible for the financial management of the project. She organized the accounts, negotiated with suppliers, and created an efficient system to control expenses and investments. Helen, despite her advanced age, showed surprising energy in supervising the agricultural development of the property. Her decades of experience in land management proved invaluable to the success of the venture. The agricultural project began with crops of corn, beans, and organic vegetables. The land, which had been neglected during the years of Richard's corrupt management, responded wonderfully to proper care. 6 months after the start of operations, the property was already producing enough food not only for the family's consumption, but also for sale in the local market. The organic products from Train Farm, as they decided to call the venture, quickly gained a reputation for quality in the region. The most exciting aspect of the project, however, was the positive impact it had on the family relationship. Michael, who had carried so much anger and resentment, found in agriculture a constructive way to channel his energy. Working side by side with his father on the land created daily opportunities for conversations and reconnection. "Dad," he said one day while planting tomato seedlings on a cool morning, "I understand now why you did what you did." "What do you mean, son?" "You wanted to protect us. I still think you could have found a better way to do it, but I understand you were trying to do what you thought was right." Charles stopped planting and looked directly at his son. "Michael, you don't have to forgive me if you're not ready yet. I made serious mistakes, and it's normal that you need time to process everything. I want to forgive you, Dad. I don't want to carry this anger forever." This moment marked the turning point in the relationship between father and son. From then on, although there were still occasional moments of tension, Michael genuinely began to rebuild his trust in his father. Lily Rose, always the most emotional in the family, had a different but equally important journey of forgiveness. She expressed her pain through drawings and little letters she wrote to her father. In one of these letters she wrote, "Daddy, I missed you so much when you weren't here. I didn't understand why you had left, and it made me very sad. But now I see how you're trying to fix things, and that makes me happy. I love you." Charles kept this letter like a treasure, always carrying it with him as a reminder of what truly mattered in life. The twins, Peter and Paul, being younger, adapted more easily to their father's return. For them, Charles's presence quickly became natural again, especially since he dedicated special time to play with them every day. The baby, Ethan, who had been born during his father's absence, developed a special bond with Charles. It was as if he instinctively understood that this man was an important and protective figure in his life. For Amanda, the healing process was the most complex of all. As a wife, she had experienced not only the pain of loss, but also the betrayal of discovering that everything had been a necessary lie, but a lie nonetheless. "Charles," she said one night as they walked along the tracks under the moonlight, "I love you and I'm happy you're back, but there are still days when I get very angry." "I understand completely, my love. In fact, it would be strange if you didn't feel anger. How do we learn to trust each other again after all this?" "One day at a time," replied Charles, holding her hand. "I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I deserve your trust again." "And if another problem comes up, will you tell me this time, or will you try to protect me again?" "I promise I will never make important decisions about our family without talking to you first. I've learned that true protection means facing problems together, not me trying to carry everything alone." This promise became the foundation for rebuilding their marriage. Charles kept his word religiously, discussing with Amanda every aspect of the farm project, all financial decisions, and even his minor concerns about the children's education. 1 year after the project began, Train Farm had become one of the most successful rural enterprises in the region. Agricultural production was exceeding all expectations, rural tourism was attracting visitors from various nearby towns, and the historical train restoration had gained recognition even from government historical preservation institutions. But the true success was measured in the small things of daily family life. Michael and Charles working together without tension, Lily Rose running happily through the fields, the twins playing without worries, Ethan growing up in a safe and loving environment, and Amanda smiling genuinely again. Helen, who was now considered the children's grandmother, was radiant seeing the property she had cared for decades finally fulfilling its vocation of being a prosperous family home. "You know," she said one afternoon, as the whole family had a picnic beside the restored train, "I always dreamed this place would have family life again. When my husband died and the railway company closed, I thought I would never see children playing among these tracks again." "Aunt Helen, you were an angel in our life," said Amanda, tenderly holding the elderly woman's hand. "If you hadn't appeared when you did—" "It wasn't a coincidence, dear. I believe some things are meant to happen. Charles inherited this property. You needed a home and I needed a family to care for. Everything fit together perfectly." It was during this picnic that Charles made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Family," he said, standing up and getting everyone's attention, "I have a proposal to make." Amanda looked at him curiously, having no idea what was coming. "Amanda Santos," said Charles, kneeling in front of his wife, "will you marry me again?" The proposal caught everyone by surprise. Technically, they were still married, since the divorce had never been finalized due to the peculiar situation of Charles's fake death. "Charles, we're already married," said Amanda, laughing in confusion. "Legally, yes, but I'd like us to have a new ceremony. A ceremony that represents the fresh start we're having as a family, that represents the lessons we've learned and the renewed promises we're making to each other." The idea deeply touched Amanda's heart. Yes, they were still married on paper, but symbolically renewing their vows would represent a definitive healing for all the wounds of recent years. "Yes," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "I accept marrying you again." The children burst into applause and shouts of joy. Even baby Gabriel seemed to understand that something special was happening and clapped along with his siblings. The vow renewal ceremony was scheduled for 3 months later. Enough time to organize a celebration that would include the entire local community that had become important in their lives. During these 3 months, the preparation for the ceremony became a family activity that brought all family members even closer together. Michael helped his father build an outdoor chapel next to the train. Lily Rose and Amanda chose the flowers and decorations. The twins were responsible for helping Helen prepare the party menu. The local community also got involved in the preparations. The town priest, who had known Charles before his disappearance and was deeply moved by the whole family story, offered to officiate the ceremony for free. The neighborhood women organized themselves to help with food and decorations. The men volunteered to help with construction and event organization. John Charles, the boy from the neighboring farm who had become friends with the children, was put in charge of training a small choir of local children to sing during the ceremony. The chosen date was exactly 2 years after the day Amanda had first arrived at the abandoned train. Helen suggested this date as a way to transform a painful memory into a celebration of renewal and hope. On the morning of the ceremony, the entire property was transformed. The train, completely restored, shone under the morning sun. The outdoor chapel that Michael and Charles had built was decorated with wildflowers that Lily Rose had gathered from the surrounding fields. Amanda wore a simple yet elegant white dress that Helen had specially made for the occasion. The children wore new clothes, bought with the money the family now had due to the success of their enterprise. Charles wore a dark suit that had belonged to Helen's husband, which she had tailored for him. Helen said it would be an honor to see that suit being worn in a celebration of love on the property that she and her husband had loved so much. When the time for the ceremony came, over 100 people from the local community were present. Neighboring farmers, town merchants, honest public officials who had supported the family during difficult times, and even some people from nearby towns who had heard the story and wanted to join the celebration. The priest began the ceremony by speaking about second chances, about forgiveness, about a family's ability to overcome adversity when true love is involved. "Charles and Amanda," he said, "you've been through trials that would test any relationship. But you chose to fight for your family, you chose to forgive, you chose to rebuild. This ceremony isn't just a renewal of vows, it's a celebration of what true love can achieve." When the time came for the vows, both Charles and Amanda had prepared special words for the moment. "Amanda," said Charles, his voice trembling with emotion, "I promise never to make decisions about our family without including you again. I promise that we will face all problems together, no matter how difficult they may be. I promise to be not just your husband, but your partner in every area of life. And I promise that our children will never have to go through the fears and uncertainties they experienced in recent years again." "Charles," replied Amanda, her own tears flowing freely, "I promise to completely forgive the past and focus on the future we are building together. I promise to trust you again, to give you the chance to prove you deserve a second chance. I promise that our family will be stronger now than before, because we have learned lessons that only hardship can teach." The children also took part in the ceremony, each promising to support the united family they were rebuilding. Michael, who had grown so much during those difficult months, spoke on behalf of all the siblings. "Dad and Mom, we promise that we will be a real family from now on. We will talk about our problems instead of holding grudges. We will work together to care for this land that has become our home, and we will always remember that love is stronger than any difficulty." When the priest finally declared Charles and Amanda husband and wife once more, the burst of applause and celebration from those present echoed through the surrounding fields, as if the land itself was celebrating the rebirth of that family. The party that followed lasted late into the night. There was live music, dancing, abundant food prepared by the community, and an atmosphere of genuine joy that infected everyone present. Helen, who had become the emotional heart of the celebration, danced with each of the children, and even with Charles, saying she was dancing in memory of her late husband, who would be happy to know his property had become a place of such family joy. It was during the party that an unexpected visitor appeared. A middle-aged man, well-dressed but with a nervous expression, approached Charles. "Sorry to interrupt your celebration," the man said, "but my name is Robert Smith, and I need to speak with you about Richard Coleman." Charles immediately tensed up. Richard had been in prison for months, and Charles thought all problems related to him had been resolved. "What happened?" asked Charles, stepping away from the party to talk privately. "Richard is offering a plea bargain. He wants to reduce his sentence by providing information about other crimes committed in the region." "And what does that have to do with me?" "He's claiming that you were involved in some of his criminal schemes. Says you not only knew about the thefts, but actively participated in them." Charles felt his blood run cold. After everything he had been through, after finally managing to rebuild his family life, Richard was still trying to destroy him. "That's a lie. I have all the evidence that proves I was investigating his crimes, not participating in them." "I believe you," said Robert, "but the justice system will want to investigate these allegations. You will likely be called to testify and will have to prove your innocence." Charles looked back at the party, where his family and friends were celebrating what was supposed to be the beginning of a new happy life. The thought of having to face new legal battles, of having his reputation questioned again, was almost unbearable. "When will this happen?" he asked. "Probably within a few weeks. But don't worry too much. With the evidence you have and with Richard's proven criminal record, his allegations are unlikely to be taken seriously for long." Despite Robert's reassuring words, Charles couldn't return to the party with the same celebratory spirit. Amanda immediately noticed something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, pulling him aside to a more private corner. Charles recounted his entire conversation with Robert. He watched Amanda's expression shift from joy to concern, then to determination. "We'll face this together," she said firmly. "This time, there will be no secrets or attempts to protect me. We're a family, and families face problems together." This response from Amanda was exactly what Charles needed to hear. Instead of trying to bear the problem alone as he had done last time, he allowed his wife to be his true partner in seeking a solution. In the following weeks, Charles and Amanda worked together with Helen and a lawyer she recommended to organize all the evidence that would definitively prove Charles's innocence. The lawyer, Dr. Frederick Castle, had worked on similar cases and was confident that Richard's allegations would be easily refuted. "Richard is desperate," he explained. "He knows he's facing many years in prison and is trying to take others down with him out of revenge or to seek a reduced sentence. But the evidence against him is solid, and the evidence of Charles' innocence is equally strong." Charles' testimony was scheduled for 3 weeks after the vow renewal party. Amanda insisted on accompanying him, as did Helen, who wanted to publicly demonstrate her support for the family. On the day of the testimony, Charles answered all questions calmly and honestly. He presented documents, recordings, photographs, and all other materials he had gathered during his 2-year investigation into Richard's crimes. The prosecutor handling the case was impressed by the quality and quantity of evidence presented by Charles. "Mr. Mitchell," he said at the end of the testimony, "it's clear that you not only did not participate in Richard Coleman's crimes, but were crucial in exposing and proving these crimes. Your evidence is extremely valuable to the case." Richard's allegations were officially dismissed 1 week later. The prosecutor issued a public statement clarifying that Charles Mitchell was a victim of the crimes, not a participant, and that his contribution had been essential to justice. When Charles arrived home with the official news that he was completely free from any suspicion, he found the whole family waiting at the makeshift station they had created beside the train. "Is it over?" asked Amanda, though the relieved expression on Charles's face already answered her question. "It's over," he confirmed. "Richard can no longer threaten or harm us in any way." The children celebrated as if it were a second party. Michael, who had quietly worried about the possibility of losing his father again, showed particularly great relief. "Dad, does this mean you'll never have to leave again?" "Never again, son. Our family is safe, our home is safe, and our future is secure." That evening, Charles and Amanda walked along the moonlit tracks, reflecting on the incredible journey they had taken since that first desperate day when she arrived at the abandoned train with 4 children and no hope. "Have you ever thought," said Amanda, "that if we hadn't gone through all those hardships, we might never have discovered this property, never met Helen, never created this wonderful project? Sometimes the worst things that happen in our lives end up leading to the best things," replied Charles. "Not that I recommend suffering, but sometimes it's through it that we learn what truly matters." "And what did you learn that truly matters?" "That family isn't just about being physically together. It's about being emotionally connected, trusting each other, facing problems as a team, and allowing the people we love to participate in all areas of our lives, including the difficult parts." 2 years after this nighttime conversation, Train Farm had expanded to include an educational center that hosted student groups from across the region, an organic farming project that supplied produce to 5 neighboring towns, and a historical tourism program that attracted visitors interested in local railway history. Michael had become a young leader in the community, organizing environmental projects and helping other youth develop interest in sustainable agriculture. His transformation from a rebellious child to a responsible and engaged young man was a constant source of pride for his parents. Lily Rose had discovered a passion for history and became the lead guide for the historical train tours. Her ability to tell captivating stories about the railroad's past delighted visitors of all ages. The twins, Peter and Paul, now 8 years old, were happy and healthy children who considered the railway property the only home they'd ever truly known. They had grown up running between the tracks, playing in the fields and helping with farm chores according to their abilities. Ethan, who was now 3, was a particularly special child for the family. Having been born during the most difficult times and raised during the Reconstruction, he symbolically represented the capacity for renewal and hope that had defined the family's journey. Helen, now over 70, remained an active and vital presence in the project. Her experience and wisdom were constantly consulted, and her emotional bond with the children had become one of the foundations of family stability. Charles had established himself as one of the most respected farmers in the region, frequently consulted by other producers about organic and sustainable farming techniques. Amanda had developed her administrative skills to the point of being invited to lecture at other agricultural cooperatives about rural financial management. But the family's true success wasn't measured in professional achievements or financial stability. It was measured in the quality of the relationships they had rebuilt, in the capacity they had developed for honest communication, in the mutual trust they had re-established. On special evenings, the entire family would gather in the original carriage where everything had begun, now transformed into a comfortable living room that preserved important historical elements. During one such evening, Charles made an observation that perfectly summarized the transformation they had experienced. "You know," he said, looking around at his gathered family, "when I was little, My mother always said that life wasn't about avoiding storms, it was about learning to dance in the rain. What does that mean? Asked Lily Rose. It means that no matter what bad things happen in life, there's always a way to find joy and meaning, as long as we have the right people by our side. Amanda smiled and added, and it means that sometimes the things that seem like the end of everything turn out to be the beginning of something much better. It was that same night that Helen made an announcement that deeply moved the entire family. "Children," she said, gathering everyone around her, "I have something important to tell you." Her serious tone made everyone worried, but she quickly reassured the family. "Don't worry, it's nothing bad. Actually, it's something very special. I've decided to officially adopt all of you as my legal grandchildren." The children burst into cheers. Helen had become their emotional grandmother long ago, but the legal formalization of this relationship was an unexpected gift. "This means," she continued, "that when I pass from this life, this entire property will officially be yours, not as a company or partnership, but as legitimate family inheritance." Charles and Amanda were too moved to speak immediately. Helen was ensuring the family's stability and security were protected forever. "Aunt Helen," Amanda finally said, "you've already given us far more than we could ever repay. This property, this new life, this united family, all of this exists only because of you." "Nonsense, my dear. You're the ones who brought life and joy back to this property. You're the ones who turned an empty place into a home filled with love and purpose." The legal adoption was formalized 3 months later in a simple but deeply meaningful ceremony held at the same courthouse where Charles and Amanda had renewed their marriage vows. At this point in the story, 5 years had passed since that first desperate day when Amanda arrived at the abandoned train. The transformation had been complete and extraordinary. The Mitchell-Morris family, they had decided to officially include Helen's surname, had become an example in the region of how adversity can be transformed into opportunities when there's determination, love, and teamwork. The Train Farm project had gained national recognition as a model for sustainable rural development. Delegations from other regions of the country regularly visited the property to learn about their techniques and approaches. But for the family, external recognition was secondary. What really mattered was having built a life based on solid values: honest communication, meaningful work, and unconditional love. Michael, now 15, had become a confident and responsible young man who dreamed of studying environmental engineering to contribute even more to the sustainable development of the family property. Lily Rose, 13, constantly developed new creative projects, from educational programs for visitors to community art initiatives involving other families in the region. Peter and Paul, at 11 years old, showed different but complementary interests. Peter was fascinated by the agricultural part of the project, while Paul preferred aspects related to maintenance and equipment mechanics. Ethan, now 8, had grown into a naturally leadership-oriented child, organizing games and activities for other visiting children, demonstrating a natural talent for hospitality and relationships. On one particularly memorable afternoon, the family received an unexpected visit that brought the story full circle. A young man appeared at the property, asking if he could speak with Charles Mitchell. He identified himself as Junior, son of Richard Coleman. The initial tension was understandable. The name Richard Coleman still evoked painful memories for the entire family. "I know my father caused you a lot of suffering," said Junior, clearly nervous. "I came here to apologize on behalf of the family and to tell you that my father has finally repented for everything he did." Charles and Amanda exchanged glances, deciding to hear what the young man had to say. "My father has been in prison for 3 years now," continued Junior. "During this time he has changed a lot. He participated in rehabilitation programs, underwent therapy, and finally understood the harm he caused to many people." "What does he want now?" asked Charles cautiously. "He wants nothing, sir. He knows he has no right to ask for forgiveness after everything he did. He just wanted me to come here and say that he deeply regrets his actions and that he's happy to know you managed to rebuild your lives." "And you? How are you handling all this?" "It was very difficult, sir. The whole family was affected by my father's actions. We lost our home, our friends, our reputation in the community. My mother had to start over in another city. Amanda, always the most empathetic in the family, felt compassion for the young man who had suffered the consequences of crimes he didn't commit. "How old are you, Junior?" 19, Mom. "And what are you doing now? Working, studying?" "I'm trying to finish high school, which I dropped out of when my father was arrested. It's hard to balance with work, but I'm determined to change the course of my life." Charles observed the young man for a few seconds, seeing in him something he recognized, the determination of someone who wanted to overcome difficult circumstances and build something better. "Junior," he said finally, "would you like to work here on the farm?" The question surprised everyone, especially Amanda, who looked at her husband with questioning eyes. "Sir," said Junior, equally surprised, "we always need help here. It's honest work, with fair pay, and you could continue studying in the evening in the city. But after everything my father did to you, why would you help me?" "Because you are not your father," Charles replied simply. "Each person is responsible for their own choices, and it seems you want to make different choices than he did." Amanda immediately understood the wisdom of Charles's decision. Offering an opportunity to Richard's son was a powerful demonstration of forgiveness and overcoming. "If you accept," she added, "you'll be welcome as part of our work team." Junior accepted the offer with emotional gratitude. Working on the property his father had tried to destroy became, for him, a form of symbolic reparation and personal growth. In the following months, Junior proved to be a dedicated and reliable employee. His presence also became a valuable lesson for the children about forgiveness, second chances, and the importance of not judging people by the mistakes of others. Michael, in particular, developed an interesting friendship with Junior. Despite the age difference, they shared similar experiences of having to overcome difficult family circumstances and rebuild their lives. Junior's presence on the farm also represented the symbolic closing of the cycle of pain caused by Richard. Instead of perpetuating resentment and revenge, the family chose to transform that experience into an opportunity to demonstrate grace and renewal. Helen, now 75 years old, observed all these dynamics with the wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to understand that life is full of circles that close in unexpected ways. "You know," she said one evening, while the whole extended family, including Junior, was having dinner together, "my husband used to say that the true measure of a person's character isn't what they do when everything is going well, but what they do after everything has gone wrong." "And what do you think we did after everything went wrong, Ace?" asked Lily Rose. "You chose love over anger, hope over despair, building over destruction. You took a situation that could have destroyed a family and turned it into a story of triumph." It was that same night that Charles reflected on something that would become one of the family's core philosophies. "I've learned," he said, "that we can't control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we respond to what happens. We can choose to be victims, or we can choose to be survivors. We can choose to carry resentments, or we can choose to carry lessons." "And what was the most important lesson you learned?" asked Amanda. "That family isn't a place where you hide from problems. Family is a group of people with whom you face problems, and when you have a true family by your side, there's no problem that can't be overcome." This philosophy became the guiding principle not only for the Mitchell-Morris family, but also for all the projects they developed in the community. The educational center at the farm began to include programs on resolving family and community conflicts. Amanda developed workshops on communication in relationships. Charles created lectures on leadership based on family values. The family's story became known beyond the local region. Journalists began visiting the property to document the extraordinary transformation that had occurred there. A documentary was produced about Train Farm, telling the entire story from the desperate days when Amanda arrived at the abandoned train to the thriving and impactful operation that existed now. But for the family, the external attention was less important than the impact they were having on the individual lives of the people who visited or worked on the property. Junior, for example, not only finished high school, but was also accepted into a federal university to study rural administration, with a scholarship that Helen had helped secure. "Aunt Helen," he said on the day he received the scholarship news, I can never repay everything you've done for me. You can repay it by being a man of character and helping others when you have the opportunity, she replied. Kindness isn't a debt to be paid back. It's a gift to be passed forward. This conversation inspired Junior to create a mentorship program for other young people in the region who were facing family difficulties. The program became so successful that other communities asked to replicate it. 10 years after that first day at the abandoned train, the property had transformed into a regional reference center for sustainable development, rural education, and family strengthening. Michael had graduated in environmental engineering and returned to work on expanding the farm's sustainable projects. Lily Rose was studying history and planning to write a book about the region's railway history. Peter had specialized in organic agriculture and was developing new production techniques being adopted by farms throughout the state. Paul had become an expert in maintaining and restoring historical equipment. Ethan, now 13 years old, demonstrated multiple talents, from community leadership to artistic skills, and was being prepared to eventually take on responsibilities in managing the property. Helen, although now over 80 years old, remained an active and vital presence in family life. Her health was excellent, and she attributed this to the joy of being surrounded by a loving and active family. Charles and Amanda, now in their 40s, had developed a marital relationship stronger than ever. The difficulties they faced together had created a level of trust and intimacy that few couples managed to achieve. Sometimes I think, Amanda said one evening, as they walked along the tracks, now lit by solar lamps, about what would have happened if I hadn't accepted that strange man's suggestion at the market. What strange man? Asked Charles, confused. The man who told me about the train. Did you never know who he was? Actually, I always thought you found out about the train through Helen. No, it was a man I'd never seen before. He approached me at the market and told me about this place. They stopped walking and looked at each other with renewed curiosity. What did he look like? Asked Charles. A middle-aged man, well-dressed but simple. She had gentle eyes and a calm way of speaking. Why? Because I never told anyone about this place. Helen didn't either. How could a stranger have known you needed shelter and that this train was available? This question remained unanswered, but instead of bothering them, it added a sweet element of mystery to the family's story. Helen, when she learned of this conversation, smiled in a way that suggested she might know more than she was letting on. Sometimes, she said, the most important things in life happen in ways we can't fully explain. Perhaps it's best to simply be grateful they happened. End of story. So, dear listener, what did you think of this moving story of overcoming and family rebuilding? What moment touched your heart the most? Do you believe Amanda and Charles made the right decisions throughout this entire journey? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. We love hearing what you think. And if this story moved you as much as it did us, don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other amazing stories like this one.